the reform I think ultimately most important in all of this is to impose restrictions on federal loans. Let me just explain. Up until recently, the federal government guaranteed student loans with no limit, and then a few years ago they began providing student loans directly through the Graduate Plus program. As long as these loans are provided without any evaluation of the likelihood of repayment, any evaluation of the economic return, without any limits on the size of the loan that students can take out, law schools will continue to raise tuition. As long as they have students who are willing to come, the federal loan program provides them with the ability to come. So in the book I propose different sorts of caps and outcome tests for loans. Now the main opposition to these proposals will come from legal academics who say that's outrageous, the loans are important to provide access to the legal profession. And my response to that objection is that what limits access today isn't the unavailability of federal loans. What limits access today is the extraordinarily high tuition that we charge. And if law schools are really committed about access, we can provide need-based financial aid. So what's inhibiting access is us, the fact that our tuition is now up to $50,000 a year. So I hope the senators, I hope someone reads this part of it. The op-ed in the New York Times that I published 2 weeks ago focused on the federal loan program for that reason. I wanted to communicate to senators that you need to take a look at the impact of providing unlimited funds, no questions asked. As long as that's the case, tuition will continue to go up.
The problem seems to me to be that not all law schools can afford the high aid that would solve the problem under your suggestion, that the law schools which can afford it are quite often, perhaps not always, but quite often, those schools whose student bodies are comprised of the already affluent, and that schools which make an effort to educate people who have been shut out of education generally and legal education in particular, and who accordingly charge very low tuitions, probably cannot afford to stay in business without federal loans. And if they can't stay, or guarantees, and if they can't stay in business, then the very schools that are making an effort to provide social and economic mobility will be the ones harmed by curtailment of federal loans. Well, that's the objection, and what do you think about that?
You're right, except insofar as that should be an important consideration when the cap is set. So for example, I propose two different kinds of caps. One is to cap how much money an individual student can borrow from the federal government. The other is to cap how much money any particular law school can get from the federal government in a given year. And so the cap can be set at a level that takes into consideration precisely your concern. The figure I came up with, and it could be any, I was just using it as an example, is to say that, that law students should not be allowed to borrow more than $120,000.
Which is a lot, by the way.
Now, that's what I was going to say. So really all that's saying to law schools is set your tuition at $20,000, you'll be okay. In fact, you can set it at $25,000, you'll still be okay. So I wasn't saying cut it off. Of course we need access and students need to borrow. I borrowed money to go to law school. My parents are school teachers. The problem is that because there's no cap, there are law schools with average indebtedness of $150,000. And these students are not going to pay, they will not pay this money back. Especially if you look at the schools and the placement rate upon graduation, which I have. So I'm really setting a cap as a way of protecting the students ultimately from taking on debt that will be unaffordable to them and imposing restrictions on the law schools in terms of how high they set their tuition. But I absolutely agree with you that we need to, whatever caps are put into place, need to be done with attention to maintaining access.
This excerpt is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law, the leader of reform in legal education and a leader in multimedia education for the public. To view the full interview and for a full listing of MSL's programs, log on to mslaw.edu.